I am live. I see it coming in. I'm live at a different link, which I really, really don't like, but for some reason, OBS ditched my scheduled event. So that's not fun. So I apologize if you went to a link that's not happening, and I hope you can still find it. I know that it's very annoying because I wanted to go live. I was already late, but I know that all my links that are going out right now are all pointing to the wrong disappeared live stream, and it really is not fun because like I had thumbnails and everything uploaded and I have to do that all again now. So yay, technology. But anyway, I'm live. Today we're gonna talk about world building, and the title for this video is, I'm sorry, I'm doing two things at the same time, checking if everything's fine. Yes, so talking world building today. So how to make your comics world feel alive. And I wanted to do that because I get a lot of questions about this, and I know that a lot of creators keep being kind of like stuck in this phase because they don't know exactly what they need to research, if they have done enough research, how to research, like how to make your world feel rich and feel alive, and like it's actually a world that your characters can live and breathe in, and that you want to transport your audience to, and it has, you know, like a lot of atmosphere and stuff. I'm still learning about world building myself. It is a never-ending quest to learn more. It has ties with things like environment design and, you know, prop design and all of that stuff, like visual development. And it is a very broad subject, but today I wanted to give you some tips on how to approach your worlds if you have trouble making them feel rich, like if your worlds have a tendency to be a little bland. Like that was definitely something that I struggled with before. I had a very big problem with backgrounds quite a few years back. It was really hard for me to think about anything to put in my backgrounds, and I remember drawing a classroom, and also because I was drawing so much from my own past, and our classrooms in high school weren't that elaborately decorated, it just looked very boring. And if that's you, I have some tips for you today. So first of all, I want to welcome you to this channel. Welcome to Pencils and Stories. This is where I teach about comics. I make comics myself, and I teach you how to start your own comics. And I have a main focus on webcomics, but a lot of this stuff applies to any kinds of comics, graphic novels, you name it. So yeah, subscribe to this channel for weekly videos and learn more about making comics. So, how I nowadays approach world building is a combination of using my imagination and using a lot of reference, and then asking myself a few questions. You might be surprised that not all artists actually are, not every artist is the most visual person, and I am kind of in the same boat. When I think about a certain kind of location that my characters are going to, or like world element stuff, I will have very like sporadic, loose images in my head, but not really very clear images. It's usually a lot of color and atmosphere and more kind of in that area. But I, like, specifically, if you ask me, like, what's going to be in those scenes, what's going to be in those backgrounds, I'm like, I don't know yet. I have to wait and see until I draw it and design it. So my imagination, at least, has, like, its limits. And I know that counts for other artists as well. There's artists who have a lot of detail, like, a very visual people, have very, very much detail in their heads. I don't, and I know that there's some other artists who also don't. And that is where, you know, thinking about and developing your world as you go comes into play, and also making use of a lot of reference and research. But again, there's a pitfall of getting stuck in there because you feel like you need to research everything. And that's where the balance between imagination and, you know, drawing from studies, drawing from reference and stuff, where that balance comes into play. So first, imagination. I wanted to show you some stuff. I'm gonna pull up right now. I need to do this. Yes. I hope you can see this. I can see this on my end. But this is my comic, the very first page of my comic. This is when we're talking about world building, like I had this idea for this large city, and it was sitting on kind of like this hill, and it was really nice. It had all kinds of like what I think of when I think of places like Italy, and some photos that I've seen online from places I haven't been to. But that was kind of the inspiration for this. And then inside the city, I have kind of like this image in my head of it being a combination of my own city, Utrecht, and then the city of Paris, which I absolutely love. And it is kind of like a combination of that. And that is why you see some, at least for this location, you see like these little bridges over here. That's very much like an Utrecht thing. And then you have like restaurants and stuff. It's very hard to do on a live stream, but people sitting in restaurants and stuff. And it's all like, it has a lot of flowers and green, and that's kind of like how I envision it. But when we get to something like this is what I wanted to show you when it comes to imagination. Like this last big panel here with like the lava vault, which I call lava vault. This is like a whole concept in my world, but this is very much a thing that when I think of like something that came straight out of my imagination is this lava vault thing. I don't exactly know if it's plausible even to have lava this close to the surface that it would actually like glow like that, but that's where I'm like, and it depends. If you have a very realistic comic, you actually might need to do more research and stuff, but my comic is partly fantasy. And that is where I'm like, I'm not going to research everything because I'm a one-person show, and it's very hard to like research everything on all your pages when you also have to bring them out. Have to put those pages out into the world. And I don't have a research team like they do in like movie studios and stuff. So I do some research of like what is the interior of a factory. So that's where I came up with like all this kind of stuff on the wall here, and then obviously here as well. Like there's like, it probably all doesn't make sense to have stuff here. But that's some stuff that I came up with when I was looking at reference of things. So I had this hallway of a factory in mind, and then I combine it with research I find, and like looking at what is actually in the hallways of a factory. What is actually a lot of stuff that you see. And I've been around greenhouses a lot. There's a lot of pipes. There's a lot of maybe valves even. Things that you can use to control stuff. So that's some of the inspiration I used as well. So it's imagination, pulling from your own experience and history, and then looking at reference. Again, the same thing goes for something like this. The fantasy element is like the glowing rocks underwater. I actually don't really know. I can imagine there's like bioluminescence underwater. But I don't really go as far, if it's not a major plot point, I don't go as far as to research if it's plausible, if it would do that. And that's sometimes, I've seen webcomics where there was something going on, and then there's a person in the comments, and that person has a lot of experience with something that is present on the page. And they will actually like start explaining things of how they work and how they should actually look. I've had those comments as well. I had this comic page, and the first page was like, it was a dragonfly. And I actually researched the dragonflies because it was the first page and I wanted to draw an actual dragonfly. But I still got comments that, no, this is not a dragonfly. And I'm like, okay. Apparently I missed something in my reference. But, that's always going to be the case. You cannot 100%, account for everything. Obviously, the less your comic is fantasy and the more it is going towards, more serious topics and more nonfiction topics, you actually might want to do like way more research, especially when you're featuring like real world issues or you're featuring a group of marginalized people. That obviously you need to do way more research than for something like this. But But then again, like you don't want to become an entire expert on the person. Like if you have a personal experience and stuff, you might really know the ins and outs. And of course you need to do your research. And then when people say like, when is it enough? I would say like in cases like that, where it's actually really sensitive topics, you will know. And then you probably still will run into stuff you haven't, thought about before. And then I think it's very good to be open about that. If people have questions, to listen, to learn more, and maybe, put it in later in a comic. But you cannot be an expert on anything. I do think that sometimes it's not smart if you don't know enough of a certain kind of topic and you are not part of a certain group, for example. It might be tough to actually go in and make an entire story really centered about that issue, but that's like a balance that I think you need to that's a balance you need to figure out for yourself. Definitely do more research for that. But if it's not that important, like for example, is there bioluminescence underwater? I go with like it needs to be fun for me as well. That's a very big part of how I make my comic. Like I just want to do fun stuff like this and this. Like I made opal trees. It makes absolutely no sense, but it is slightly related to a plot point. Well, it's a very big plot point, but I'm not going to spoil anything. But this is actually a thing that's like happening in my comic, and it's like part fantasy. I do feel about, and by the way, I'm talking about these trees with like the really weird colors, like opal colored like trees. There's this whole thing of like certain kind of chemical things being in the ground, and then the plants actually soak it up and they start taking on those properties. I think in this case, when it comes to research, I actually think this looks kind of weird still. I'm not too happy with these. And then that's another tip I wanted to give you. When you're doing fantasy stuff like this, I probably won't find, like, I'm actually not sure what would happen if I would type into Google opal tree. There's maybe even somebody else who like already did that, but I would just look at fantasy art. I would look at other artists. Don't straight up copy what they do. It's what I always say, like, don't copy artists. Don't straight up copy photos from people. It's all copyrighted material. But use it as an inspiration to see how you can approach something like this. Because what I don't like is that it just, like, they don't look like trees. And like, when you have like a shiny tree, they have like a ton of leaves that are all shiny, like, how does that even look? So you can actually, maybe there's probably pictures that are called like glass tree, or trees with gemstones on them, and I'm pretty sure that's done before in fantasy or animation or whatever. So that's when you're doing a lot of fantasy, actually looking at other fantasy art might be a really good idea, and then combine it again with your own experiences and your own research. So that's what I wanted to point out about the opal trees. Like, I could have done some more research for like the fantasy art and that kind of stuff. So that's another tip. Don't just look at a reference from real life, which is very good, but also look at other artists. And then we come to, let me grab my notes because I diverted a little bit. Yes, about the questions that you can ask yourself. Let me check OBS real fast. There is actually people online. Awesome. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. I see a Neftali. You call me Tali. Oh, hi Tali. And Autumn Wiggins. Thank you both so much for joining in. Maybe there's more people watching. If you are watching, you're awesome. I like that you love my videos and that they're helpful. That's always so good to hear. So that's awesome. But yeah, if you have any questions about world building or comics, leave them in the chat at the end of the stream. I will see if there's any questions that I can answer. So, questions that you can ask yourself, because what I hear a lot of people say is like, I don't know what to put in my backgrounds, and I have like this thing of like, I don't know, I have a castle, and I cannot think of anything except a lot of bricks and then some old furniture and, a banner here and there. Like, what is actually inside a castle? And that is, apart from looking at a reference, there's like some questions that you can ask yourself. And those things are, let me switch back to myself, by the way, so you're not looking at this very old page. Hello, I'm back again. Grabbing my notes. So yeah, first of all, who lives in that place or who is traveling through that place? Your world is very, very tied to your characters, to the people who live there. And I know some people have this tendency, and like the person associated with this problem is J.R.R. Tolkien, because they will build their entire own Middle Earth, and they will have their entire like lore and history, and and if you are a super geek like Tolkien was, you will even create languages for it, which is very fun to do. But I would actually advise you to keep that as a side hobby, because a lot of creators will run into this issue when they developed their world and their stories so much that now they have too much information and they have a hard time figuring out what to actually put in the story. And that's where your backgrounds and your world building really comes in handy, because you can show a lot about the characters and your world and who lives in places and stuff, and things like, I don't know, class or certain kind of groups of people and what they like and what their culture is like in your backgrounds without even communicating. So you don't have to go on this entire side tangent of like, and now we're going to visit like this area of the country that has like a certain kind of cultural people that I really developed and that I really love, but actually I only use them in one scene. So use that info, all the info that you got, and put it into your backgrounds. Ask yourself, like, who are these people? What is their culture? Do they have a lot of colorful, textures in places? Like, do they sell their food on the streets? Or do they have certain kind of professions that you might actually see, like cars driving by having certain kind of supplies? And when we come back to the castle, like, who is living in the castle? Is it like a rich person, or is it a person who can barely scrape by and everything's kind of like fake? And what is on a castle wall? And you might actually think back to like the history of that family who lives there, or maybe it's like a whole community living in a castle, maybe it's stuff that they need for their daily work, and come up with stuff like that. And again, if you're not doing a historic piece on the Middle Ages or something, you can actually have some leeway with that. I advocate for having a lot of fun, and I personally don't think that everything should be super researched and very detailed and correct. Again, focus on what matters. If it matters that it is correct, try and get it as correct as possible. Again, you might set a time limit of like, I'm going to give myself a year of research. If it's a really, really topic that you really need to dive into, give yourself a year. Try to become like very learned about that subject, and especially look at what the sensitive issues are, and try to listen to as many like the actual people that you're like writing and drawing about, and have a few people actually look it over for you, because you might miss certain stuff, and be open if people have critiques or feedback. But if you don't necessarily need to do that, again, just have fun. And some people take it to the ridiculous, which is also, it's like super fun. Those comics where it's like everything's over the top, and they combined modern stuff with old stuff, and they took it even further. Like, thinking on the castle example, like, I'm super making this up as I go. But like you have those banners on the wall. Like, you can make it like super super like an ad, like a modern ad, something like that. You know, you can mix and match, and especially if you're doing fantasy or parody or satire or anything like that, you can totally like do that. That's what a lot of people do with like mixing like older time periods with like pop culture. You will get stories like that. It can be super fun. So yeah, just have a lot of fun, but you know, also set time limits for yourself, because world building can be a gigantic trap, and you can be the next Tolkien, which is fine if you want to be. But also your comic will probably take a million years to make. Yeah, so always balance it. And then, you know, what can you communicate about your story is another question I would ask. Like, first of all, it's like, who are the people living there? What's the aesthetics? Who's in charge? You know, is it a well-used road that's all, you know, like broken up and stuff? Is everything new? Is it very modern? And especially if you're doing things in like the future and stuff, you need to like really design things. But is there any story stuff that you can communicate through your backgrounds? Is there any plot stuff that you then don't have to spell out in dialogues or entire scenes? Again, what I always say is like study a lot of movies, and I love animated movies because they often have a lot of info in the background. You know, things you won't even notice if you watch the movie, but it can give just that little bit of atmosphere and hint of the world being lived in, that it is really, you know, it really adds to it. And you don't have to like put a lot of stuff in there, but just picking the right kind of things. Like if you're, I don't know, I'm just thinking about, you know, like toys or dolls. When you have like a character who is just going from preteen to teen, you know, you can do all kinds of like visual storytelling stuff with the stuff in the background of like they don't really fit into the room with all of the toys anymore, and they're in a transition period, and then they have a area with like the dolls, and they have an area which they're like more focused towards books or focused more towards makeup or, you know, sports, whatever. And then you can, you know, do stuff with that if you're designing a room, for example, and it is relevant to your story. So you don't have to have this very heavy scene of like, yeah, because I'm in this transitional period, you know. You can really show a lot in your backgrounds. So again, think of like, what is my story about? And that's what I always come back to. What is your story about? What is most important? What do you need to communicate very clearly and needs to be very very detailed and correct? And what is the stuff that you can maybe skimp on a little when we're talking about backgrounds? I did a whole video about making comics. I think the title is Making Comics Faster. I'm actually not sure. The thumbnail is like a background of my comic. It's like a sea with like fjords and mountains. That's a good video to watch to see what you can leave out of your backgrounds. Because, for example, if you have a laboratory and you have a, you know, there's all kinds of rows, all kinds of tools and materials. Like I don't necessarily think you should draw all of that out, but like indicate the shapes, and then again focus on the things that are more important, like more in the foreground and more related to your characters. But that's a whole other video in and of itself, like how to simplify backgrounds. But that is something to look into, and especially comics are very good at simplifying the backgrounds because they have to draw like a ton of stuff. So look at other comics to see about that. But you know, those kinds of places can, you know, you can use a lot of shorthands sometimes, things that we automatically associate with the laboratory, you know, like all of the stuff they use for their experiments, or you know, tubes. So you can use that kind of stuff, and then again look at don't make it too stereotypical. But yeah, what kind of atmosphere do you want to get across? Like, is it a place where it's always raining? Is it a very sunny, happy place? And then you can use that even to contrast things in your story with. But can you use descriptive words? That can always help when you're trying to think of a certain atmosphere, and then you can kind of figure out the words that you need to use into Google or into Pinterest, for example. Use descriptive words like it's a dark alleyway, for example. Like, what is in a dark alleyway? Why do alleyways look spooky sometimes? Like, it's a dark alleyway. It's a damp morning. Like, look at photos. What is a damp morning? What kind of colors can you use? So instead of having a character say, "Ooh, it's very cold and damp today," like, you can really, really show that in your colors, especially, and in the way that you use certain effects, maybe like mist or anything like that. So really think about what is the atmosphere and the emotion that you want to get across in the scene, and then start using, like, it was a heavy atmosphere, it was a very heavy day, and just type that into, I don't know, a stock photo site or something, or into Google, and you will get all kinds of other people's interpretations of what a heavy day is or a heavy atmosphere, and that can maybe give you some more ideas for visual storytelling that you can put into your backgrounds and your worlds. And that just having that atmosphere, having a few little details, on the wall in your castle, having a few little details in the laboratory that makes it a laboratory, all of that stuff will feel like it is an actual real world, and it's not just a room that you put a chair in and then some characters, and then also, like, to reiterate, use your imagination, sit down for 5 minutes and just think about, well, this new location that I'm going to design, and then I'm going to put my characters in, like, what is the atmosphere there? What are they doing there? What do they need to do there? And what is the background information that I can put in there to really, really, really communicate the emotions and the stuff that I want to get across with my story? And then what is the most important stuff that we need to see? And if it's irrelevant to the story, if it's not really adding anything, like all those little details about all the people who live in that place, it's fun for yourself, but maybe you don't need them in your comic. Maybe you can do something with a side story one day, or if you're making a how I made this kind of like book ever, if you're doing a Kickstarter, for example, you might do like something where you're gonna sell an ebook on Gumroad or something that has more background info on your world. Like, people eat that stuff up. It's so fun, all those concept art things. If you want to write a whole like history of my world kind of thing, maybe there's a few fans of yours that really, really love that, and instead of dumping it in your comic like this big text wall, maybe do more things like that with it. And then the key to that is always, is it relevant to my story? Yeah, I think that was it. I'm gonna see if there's any questions in the chat. Hey, Bobo. Hello. It's Bobo Darling from Design with Purpose. Awesome. That's so cool that you came to watch. And then Aditya, I hope I pronounced your name right. I'm sorry if I don't. I sit down to create a character and I don't know what to do. Yeah, it's kind of the same as what I talked about before with like the world, like the questions you ask yourself and the info that you want to get across. Like, what is their function in your story? Are they a main character? Do they actually carry a lot of like the thematic themes in your plot? Like, for example, if they have an entire character arc you want them to go through, if they're a very insecure person at the beginning, they might actually dress very insecurely. They might, hunch over more like this, and they will have a very insecure posture, and that's how you can start designing them and really think about, well, this person at first they are very insecure. Like, what does that mean for the way they carry themselves, the way they communicate with other characters and stuff. And then that obviously has an influence on the way they dress as well. And then maybe there's people that you think about, like certain actors, certain roles that they played, certain characters from animated movies, and just collect a bunch of inspiration from all of those places. I remember for my characters, I had like a folder of actors and characters and certain photos and paintings that I had seen that just reminded me of the character, if that made sense. Sometimes you see something and it makes you think of your character. It can also be music, and then really sit with that and see what kind of images come up, and then do a lot of drawing. Character design is a lot of drawing for me. It doesn't come super easy. I just usually have to sit a while and do a lot of sketches, and then you will get closer and closer and closer, especially if it's main characters. Like for minor characters that don't necessarily care that much that they actually are very well designed. I have a general idea in my head of what they look like, and then I'll just, design it. But for my main characters, I have a group of like seven to eight characters that are actually very, very recurring. And for those, I did a lot of designing and a lot of sketching. And eventually you will get closer to that design, and there will be a point where you look at it and you're very close, and you only need to tweak some minor things, and then eventually you're like, hey, there you are. That is at least the process, how it goes for me. I always try to encourage people, like, it took Glenn Keane, I think it was like 6 months to come up with the design for the Beast. It took him 6 months, and he's like a character designer. Of course, the Beast is a major character, so it really had to be right. But like, that's what he's paid for, 6 months to design. Like, he probably did more designs, but just to sit and to keep going and to keep going until you have it. So that's what I always say to people, to remind them, like, when it doesn't come immediately, that's super normal, and just keep at it. Keep coming back to it, keep sketching, tweaking until you got them. So I hope that answered your question. Tali is asking, is it possible to take questions from a writer's questionnaire as a base for your story's world? I'm not quite sure what a writer's questionnaire is. I know that there's a lot of character questionnaires out there, but there must be world questionnaires. A writer's questionnaire. If you can type in the chat what specifically you mean. Is it like a story, kind of like a framework to come up with a story, or because character questionnaires, yeah, sure, they will often have questions like, is this character rich? What is this character's history? And I don't know, what's their favorite day of the week? And that can count for like entire worlds and cultures as well. I usually I have a little bit of a pet peeve about doing a ton of questionnaires and stuff, because it's such a pitfall to keep doing them and to keep developing and to keep more developing and more writing, and a lot of people feel like they need to have the characters and the worlds completely down before they can start making pages. But I actually, in my experience, it is the case that the world and the characters will come alive when you start engaging with the story and when you start to actually make it. At least has been my experience. Like, I would have come up with a lot of ideas for my story and for my characters, and then I started a story and I got all kinds of other ideas because the characters actually started engaging, and I actually put them in certain scenes, and as I was drawing the scenes, I would get ideas for stuff, and the places, like especially the city that my comic starts in, really started to develop, and I started drawing it. Like, I really expanded on that first page in later pages. So I am a very big fan of making it up as you go, because if you want to research everything before you start making your pages, you can just be doing that for like 2-3 years, and then you still have not even drawn one page, so you're still at ground zero when it comes to upping your comic skills. So I would definitely, like, I would say do the bare minimum, and that's actually like a leeway into something that I want to share with you as well, is that I have a course coming up, and this is something I advocate in that course. It's a course on starting your comic. It takes you through the entire process of coming up with the idea, developing the idea, coming up with the story, and outlining the entire story. That is the thing that I actually say that you have to have ready before you start making the pages. Your story needs to have an outline, and you need to have your main characters designed. And then the world building, I go through, like what I think is the bare minimum stuff. Like that, I basically list out all the steps you need to take before you can start making your pages. And when you've gone through my course, you can start making your pages. And you will still run into stuff that you need to design. But I think that most, if not all, webcomic artists work like that. Because, like, making comics goes a little slow, especially if you have a comic of like 100 pages, you will be at page 50 and you will have all kinds of new ideas again for design. So if I would have already designed stuff for the ending of the comic, I would have to redesign it again anyway. So that's why I personally don't advocate for like designing everything in advance. But yeah, sure, you can do the questionnaires. If you feel like your world is still lacking, then definitely, because the questionnaires, like the questions that I was talking about earlier, of like, who is living here? What is the history? Like, is there a culture that has a certain kind of history? Is there a culture with a certain kind of, do they have holidays? Do they have specialties when it comes to food? Is it a very kind of like culture in which people are outside a lot, or are they like inside people? Yeah, and often questionnaires will have a lot of questions that you can answer. When I now use questionnaires, I'll just pick some things that I think will be interesting, that I'm like, oh, that could actually help me in my story, because I don't need to know what my character's favorite food is, and I don't really need to know when the king of this country was instated in which year, and who his mother was or whatever. So not every question is relevant. So pick the ones that are relevant to your story, I would say, and try to answer them. Could be fun. Yes, for sure. So if you're new to my channel, and if you are not new, you might have heard about this already, but I'm just going to repeat it for the new people. If you're new, I have an entire checklist that is based on the course that I just talked about, which is the ultimate checklist to start your comic. And it's basically an outline of stuff that you can gather before you can start making your pages. So stuff you need to think about in terms of like page sizes or story and all that fun stuff. So if you want to get that checklist, go to pencilsandstories.com/extra. And if you want to keep updated about the course that's coming up, and this is very scary, I'm going to announce a date in which I'm going to launch the Kickstarter. It's my intention to launch the Kickstarter on January 25th in 2020. I really debated going for the, December and stuff, but with all the holidays, I figured it was just going to be a mess, and people are already like very occupied and they have, they have all kinds of other stuff to think about. So that's why I moved it to January. So 2020 is not going to be the year like I really aimed for 2020, but the course got a little more elaborate than I thought it was going to be. So I'm going to launch it in January. That's when the Kickstarter will be live for 1 month. And the course will have a very special introductory price, like a early bird pilot thing. And after that, it will never be that cheap again. So if you want to be notified when a Kickstarter launches, go to howtostartacomic.com, and then you can sign up. And I will send you an email the moment the Kickstarter launches, so you won't miss it. And the course will have 4 modules, and we'll go through idea, story, designing, and then really optimizing and then making your pages. That's actually a module where I go in not too great of depth, because that's a whole other course I have about how to actually make a really good comic page, but I will go over the overview of how to actually make one and what the steps are that you need to take for that page. So yeah, that's super excited. I'm very excited for this course. It will have a Discord. It will have live streams every month. It's going to be super fun. So don't miss out. And I think that's it. There's not any more questions. So that ends the live stream for today. I hope it helped in figuring out if you're stuck in your story or in your world, I should say. If you're stuck in your own world. It sounds horrible, but also kind of fun. Then, yeah. There's one question coming in. What about magic system questionnaires? If it's relevant to your story, definitely go for it. Just pick the questions you think that will enhance your world, that in a way that is in support of your story, but doesn't give you too much extra info that you cannot use anywhere. You know what I mean? Like all the Tolkien stuff, and then you have to write the Silmarillion for your own. The Silmarillion? I never know how to pronounce that. You have to write that one book that he never got to finish that basically explains the entire lore of your world. You can do that, absolutely, if you want to. But yeah, if it's not relevant to your story, I would personally cut it. So the comic is elaborate enough as it is. So I hope that helps. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Thanks so much for watching live. And I'm so sorry if you got confused by all the, different kind of links that were sent out that are not pointing to the right video. I'm gonna check what happened, because I had the video scheduled in OBS and in YouTube itself, and I did all kinds of optimization and thumbnails for it, but I don't know what happened. Anyway, thank you again. Leave the video a thumbs up if it was helpful. Leave a comment as well if you're watching later. And for now, I want to thank you. I said that way too many times.